Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Executive Spotlight, an occasional series highlighting professionals seeking positions in the nonprofit world. This is a service of Rogue Tulip's nonprofit consulting and association management services, and we're so pleased to be able to support our colleagues as they seek their next opportunity. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp. I'm a certified association executive, and I am the principal and founder of Rogue Tulip's nonprofit consulting. And this episode, we're here with Andy Clark, who is an expert in operational excellence. Welcome, Andy.
Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. We're glad to have you here because you are an expert in an area near and dear to my heart, which is operations. I think it is sometimes an overlooked professional expertise. And you are an expert in operational excellence. So could you tell our audience a little bit about what that means to you?
Sure. What that means to me is I love to improve organizations' operations, to make them better. And when I say better, to me that means you need to consider two things. You have to consider both efficiencies and effectiveness. Some people consider one or the other, but to me, they need to be linked so that you both use your money the best way you can and achieve the results and the outcome that you really want, that the mission of your organization is moving toward.
And I think that's really important too. That is a balance we should all look for, because to me, efficiency is more task related. Are you getting that task done quickly? Whereas effectiveness supports long-term organizational goals. Is that your approach to that balance?
Yeah, that is how I think about it. A friend recently mentioned that nonprofits are great. They have missions and they're focused on them, but at times, because they're so focused on their mission and so focused on serving their clients or their members, they can be undermanaged. And I like to look at both, to look at an organization, understand their mission, their vision, where they're going, and then sort of do an assessment to figure out, well, where are some opportunities where they could do things better and meet their mission better and perhaps use their funds better? Are there leaders supported by managers getting those things done? It's at a high level how I think about operational excellence and making their operations really do what you and members or clients want.
Yeah, I think that's a really great goal to have, especially in seeking a position with a new organization. And I have to say, after all my years in the profession, I have to admit, sometimes we are undermanaged in the association world. And another thing I believe that leads to is silos in organizations. And I'm sure you've confronted that. That can be a problem in a nonprofit, a charity or a foundation, or at an association of any kind. So what's your approach to breaking down those silos?
So you're right. And I'll say I've spent time in corporates, I've spent time in higher education, I've spent time in nonprofits, medical device utilities. So I've worked in a lot of different areas, and silos exist in all those areas. And as I work to make things better, what I've come to realize is silos are important. They were created to create efficiencies and effectiveness within the different areas. So as I've worked in my later years, I actually don't try to eliminate the silos. I punch holes in them so that you connect the silos, because there are reasons for the silos and you get some effectiveness and efficiencies within them. But the ones that have no idea where left hand, right hand, or what they're doing. So I tend to think of it as creating bridges and letting some light into the silos so that the silos that are around them know what's going on. As I guess I sort of non-politically correctly talk about punching holes, so people in one silo know about the others. They can reach from one silo into another and work to create better ways to do things in an organization, an association, school, or university.
So that's a great approach. You're right. I think what we look at I think in the association world, we tend to use silo as kind of a negative, because that means those people aren't talking to other people. But I like your idea of building those bridges between the silos. Sometimes we refer to that as building cross-functional teams. So what's
Mhm.
your view on that approach?
Yeah, cross-functional teams are almost the way that things need to be done nowadays. Certainly, I would add to that not only cross-functional, but they need to be diverse, inclusive. You need to consider the equity in all of those. I just recently took a DEI certification, which opened my eyes up a little further. Your teams need to be cross-functional. You need to have people from different levels and understanding of processes in an organization so that you get all the right points of view when you're looking at an organization or how they do things. When I think about a process, you have what I used to call swim lanes of the different people and the different functions all involved in that. And you need to know what each does, where the handoffs are, and ideas in that aspect to capture them all to make things improve.
Mhm. So, and I think that's great because I think a lot of times our staff and our colleagues are sort of in a swim lane because they're doing what they need to do and getting where they need to go. And we kind of do that parallel. But I want to follow up on something you just mentioned. You said you just recently added some DEI training to your background. Did you find that that changed your approach in any way, or do you feel it just supported your approach with more information? I mean, how did the DEI affect your outlook?
I would say it was more of the latter, supporting it. In I guess all 17 years when I worked at a university, we had pretty diverse teams of people involved in that, and we had faculty, staff, and students involved in those. So we were pretty involved, and I always supported that. But it was a 7-session series of meetings. They invited a lot of great speakers, so it deepened my understanding and gave me more of an appreciation of different aspects of diversity that I hadn't thought of before based on my background and my experience.
Well, I think that's great. And I know we're all working to learn more about that. And in my opinion, it comes down to just getting to know people a little better and their background to help understand them and give them a more fulfilling work experience if you can. Uh, so you have worked at universities, you've worked at for-profits, you've worked at nonprofits. So our show is called Nonprofit Executive Spotlight. So if you were looking specifically for a nonprofit position, what kind of position would that be? Would it be at a foundation, a charity, a trade association?
I guess when I think about, so the last 3 years it was at an association. So I became more familiar with an association and supporting the members because it was a member-driven, member-funded organization. Although most of my career, I feel that I created and led organizations that supported usually other employees or clients. So I think of that as a similarity. In the nonprofit world, I would be open to any of those. When I think about sort of my favorite role, it could be in nonprofits, higher ed, and that was really creating offices that transformed organizations, that made them better. And I've done that a few times to create and then lead an office that works across an organizations to support them becoming more effective and more efficient. And that was just really a lot of fun for me, both making the changes within the organization. And my own personal belief is a supervisor, one of their main responsibilities is to develop and support their staff. And so we always had developmental retreats, and we pick an area of interest and develop people, and then have ongoing evaluation and assessment. And in the last position, my staff wanted to meet every 2 weeks with me to find out how they were doing. And even though they were highly skilled professionals, that was what they asked for. So that I felt that was important to them. So we met. So that's probably the most fun position and what it would be wonderful for me to find a position in a foundation, a nonprofit, an association. It wouldn't matter. Something where I could create that change and better deliver the mission to the members or clients. That'd be super.
Well, I love that you described operational transformation as a lot of fun because, again, I think a lot of people look at operations and they know it's important and it's necessary, but they don't think it's a lot of fun. I'm with you. I think it can be fun. But that leads me to my next question for you.
Sure.
Successful organizations do have processes and infrastructure in place and policies for doing things internally, but sometimes organizations become a slave to the system instead of using the system as the tool it's intended to be. So
Sure.
I'm sure you've come across that. How do you address that?
Certainly came across that in many of the organizations I've reported to or within the IT organization, and people tended to think of me not as I think of myself as a business person, but they start to label me as an IT person. Because IT underlies everything, it's certainly involved in it, but we used to talk about, yes, people would pave the cattle paths like they did in Boston, where the cattle used to roam, and then that became the most efficient way. So the way to address it is to understand the goal or the purpose of a system. And when we did process improvement work, we had a really kind of specific definition of what a process was, and some things didn't meet that definition. Operations are ongoing. Processes have a start and an end, not quite the same as a project that has a clear start and end, but a process has something that kicks it off, and you have some goal and a result that you want that hopefully leads to an outcome for society or for a member. You need to understand that and focus on that. And by getting people to focus on that, it gets them sort of away from getting stuck in a process or a system, and getting them back to focus on the goals gets that focus a little more where I think and based on what you said, where you think it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because systems are tools. I know we all have run into people who said, but the process is this, and even if it's not working or appropriate any longer. So I think that's great that you can do that for organizations. So we're coming near the end of our time.
Yep.
So I'll ask you one more question before we do our wrap up. Is there an individual, real or fictional, that you look to either inspire you as someone in operational excellence or that you like to model?
Oh, I don't know that there is a specific person that I like to model. I'm a bookaholic, so I read all the time. I'm recovering, never recovered bookaholic, so I'm reading all the time. I have read some really old stuff, hammer stuff on process reengineering that started my interest, I think. But then there's workflow modeling, newer things by different authors. So I don't think there's any specific person that I could point to that I try to follow. I'm always trying to find more and learn more.
That's great. I think that's a wonderful answer. I am also a bookaholic. I have books all over my house, so that's great. And what that says to me is that you're constantly learning and you're keeping up, and that's what's important. And just in case anyone's curious, the character that inspires me is Dagny Taggart in Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
Okay.
She was in operations, and she was the one trying to save the world through operations. So, and here in the nonprofit world, we can save our little part of the world through operational excellence and transformation, as inspired by Andy Clark. So, Andy, do you have a closing thought for the audience on the topic of operational excellence? And then how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to talk with you more?
So the closing thought is look and be curious about how things could be better and why are they the same way and what might you be able to change. That is always what drives me. When I started, I asked a supervisor, does anyone understand how this place works top to bottom? Because I wasn't familiar with higher ed. And he said, no. And he paused. He said, that's your job. So that I've sort of considered that my job. When I get in an organization, trying to figure out how it works and what it does and how to make it better. The best way to get in touch with me probably is through LinkedIn. And because Andy Clark is a common name, if you're looking for me and you type in Andy Clark, MPAMS, like written at the bottom of the screen right now, that'll bring me up, I think, is the first choice in there. And then there's more information and contact information in there. If you wanted to reach me, that'd be great. I'd love to talk, chat, and help if I can.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode, Andy. It's been great talking with you about operational excellence. And I encourage the audience to reach out to Andy if you're seeking a person to come in and help your organization perform better, reach its goals, and become more streamlined. So that's it for this episode of Nonprofit Executive Spotlight. Thanks for joining us. And we'll be back next time, unless everyone gets a job.
Thank
See
you.
you then.